Welcome back, everyone. Man, this topic today is one of those things that really makes you stop and think about the boundaries of science. When the news broke about Tom Brady cloning his dog, the internet just exploded. Some people thought it was an amazing use of technology and love, and others, well, they found it really unsettling. And it brings up so many questions. How does this actually work? Is the clone dog really the same dog? And what does it mean for the future of how we deal with grief and loss? To help us navigate this pretty complex territory, I needed someone who doesn't just read the headlines, but actually understands the building blocks of life. Joining me today is Ben Granich. He is an assistant professor of biology at Macer University. He specializes in molecular biology, genetics, and runs a research lab tackling some serious stuff like cancer biology. Ben is the exact kind of expert we need to separate the hype from the science. Ben, welcome to the Transform You Live show. It is great to have you here.
Welcome to the Transform You live show.
One. So, Ben, let's strip away the sci-fi element for a second. As a layman, when I hear cloning, I picture a Xerox machine. I put one dog in and I get an identical copy out. So, as a molecular biologist, how far off is my mental image? What is cloning, biologically speaking?
Yeah, I mean, so you're not really all that far off. Cloning, when we talk about organismal cloning, right? Cloning of a whole organism, it's usually done through this technique called somatic cell nuclear transfer, which is a fancy way of saying you take the nucleus, which is kind of the key part of a cell that holds all of the DNA, and you shove it into another cell, and then you grow that into an organism, right? And so that clone is going to be nuclearly identical. All of the DNA inside the nucleus will be the same, and that's most of our DNA. So it does, you know, for the most part, be an identical copy or Xerox copy of whatever organism you're trying to clone. But there's a little bit more to it than just nuclear DNA. So the nucleus is this big organelle that we have. It houses our DNA. We have lots of other organelles, though, and one of them is the mitochondria, and that has its own set of DNA. Right? And so this process we use for cloning doesn't take that into account. And so these clones, while they're pretty close, they're not actually perfect copies.
So as you were speaking, Ben, the first thing that come to mind is genetic material. Maybe walk us through the process, maybe in the simplest terms possible. If someone like Tom Brady, the GOAT, wants to clone their late dog, Lou, what actually happens in the lab to make that new puppy?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the genetic material, the DNA, like I said, it's housed in the nucleus, this storehouse for it. And so if you want to clone your dog or your pet or whatever, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to find a cell that still has that DNA inside of it. And so if you look at an organism like us or a pet, all of the cells in that organism, for the most part, have a nucleus and they all share identical DNA, right? All of the DNA and all of your different types of cells are the same. It's just we use some of it in some cells and another part of it in other cells, and that's what makes different cells different. So the idea is you could take maybe a skin cell or like a cheek swab cell from a pet, and you can pull out its nucleus, and then you can save that. That has the whole instructions of that organism in the genetic material. And then you have to take an egg cell from a donor, right? So it doesn't have to be the animal you're trying to clone, it can be something else, but it's a living organism. You harvest an egg from it and you remove its nucleus and throw it away and you replace it with the nucleus of your pet, right? And then you stimulate it either with chemicals, sometimes electricity, and that egg cell will start to divide and grow into a new organism, right? And you can place that back into a surrogate and it'll grow and develop into a new puppy or kitten or whatever it is you're trying to clone. But the difference is instead of having the nucleus of whatever that egg cell came from, it has the exact DNA of your pet. Right?
Man, I get nerded out on this type of stuff, man, and my audience, they're going to be pretty interested in, what we talked about here, and so we have this genetic twin, and what comes to mind is this $1 million question that everybody usually have, Ben, and I think this is where people get it confused too. So just because the DNA is identical, does that mean the dog is absolutely identical? Are they getting the same personality, the same quirks, or the same memories?
Right, right. You're on your questions getting at this path that I think a lot of people do get hung up on.
Yeah.
In sci-fi and comic books and stuff, it's like you make the clone and it has all of these memories from its previous form or whatever, but that doesn't seem to be true, right? It's a completely separate organism. It's not even completely identical in a DNA sense, like we were talking about. There are other components, really important components to a cell outside of the nucleus, right? So it's identical at the nuclear level, but outside of that, completely different. So when that organism grows up, if it's a dog or whatever, it's probably going to look more or less just like your other pet, right?
Hmm.
But I think this is where the idea of cloning and our looseness with cloning can be a little problematic because we kind of conflate nuclear genome or nuclear DNA with individuality, right? So
Yeah.
just because you clone a pet, it might look the same, it might act really similar, right? It might have a lot of similar behaviors, but it's not the same individual, right? There's so much that goes into making us what we are outside of our nuclear DNA and outside of the cell itself, right? It's the environment, it's the growth conditions that were there during development and throughout its life, right? It's not going to have the same memories. It's its own new individual, right? It might look like a twin, right? But we know in people, twins might look the same, they might behave similar, but they're still different people with their own idiosyncrasies.
That right there is a crucial point, and then we got this whole nature versus nurture all over again. And I think
Hmm.
that leads us directly to the ethical side of this. You kind of touched on it a little bit, which is pretty murky. So I hate to keep sticking on the cute puppy, but at the end of the process, we see the cute puppy, but we don't see the lab work. From what I understand, that isn't a efficient process, right? It's not just one try, one success. Can you talk a little bit more about, I guess, the cost of cloning in terms of failed attempts or surrogate animals involved?
Sure, sure. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it's kind of ethically murky as we start to conflate, like I was saying, this idea of individuality and like, oh, well, we can just replace that organism or that person or whatever with a clone, which is not true. But also you're right, the process is not perfect. It takes sometimes multiple trials. You have to be able to get the nucleus out. You have to be able to harvest an egg cell from a surrogate, right? And so that's you have this bank of organisms that you're pulling egg cells from, and it's kind of challenging to get egg cells. So if you think of in humans or in vitro fertilization for women who have
Yeah.
fertility issues, that's kind of an intense process to get your eggs collected. You have to take medicines and have those collected kind of invasively sometimes. And so all of that's having to happen on the animal for whatever you're cloning. So it creates this need for kind of a bank, I guess you could say, animals that you're harvesting products from, harvesting the eggs from, and then using them as surrogates to grow the organism you're cloning, right? And so it can kind of be a little bit of a dystopian breeding farm kind of setup, right? For that, and there can be a lot of devaluation of life, I guess, in terms of that as well. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up your neutral, and from all that you said, you really pointed out the reality that people don't really consider when they read the headline. I want to pivot to the human element since you brought up your neutral. The drive to do this usually comes from deep grief. Losing a pet can be devastating. They are our family, but as someone who studies life, do you think cloning is a healthy way for humans to process the inner life stage, or we sort of, using technology to avoid letting it go?
Yeah, I would not say that it's like a healthy way of coping, and I think that's what a lot of people are using it for. It's like, well, I get a second chance with this pet or whatever. And it's just not true, right? It might look true, but it's not. It's a different being, right? With its own individualness, right? And so it's not healthy for us to train ourselves in this thought pattern of, well, the pet died or whatever, it got sick and it's gone, or we lost it or whatever, we can just get a new one, right? I think replacement of living things is not something that should be taken lightly. And cloning is kind of a facsimile of that, right? It looks like we're bringing it back, but of course we're not. And so I don't think it's a particularly helpful technique for grieving, for personal loss. There's a time and place for cloning, I think. If there's, for whatever reason, some kind of species that you're having a lot of trouble breeding, right? So like pandas in captivity or something, they're notorious for not wanting to breed in captivity. So I could imagine you're trying to clone to do some other purpose, but for replacing a particular individual, I think is not a great use of cloning. If you want another pet because you loved the temperament of that dog, or it was just, beautiful, and you want something that looks just like it, then, I don't see a problem with that,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't recommend seeing it as, Fido number 2 or whatever.
Yeah. Um, it's very fascinating how the biology and psychology are kind of intertwined here. So before we wrap up, man, I want to look forward a bit. You run a research lab, so you're in the trenches of biotech all the time. And right now, we are talking about wealthy celebrities cloning dogs. Where does this technology go in 10 or 20 years? Are we looking at cloning endangered species like we've seen with the dire wolf? Or, and I have to ask, are we stepping closer to human application?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think, people like George Church, who's the founder of Colossal Bioscience, who did the direwolf cloning. I think they would like to go in that path, right? So as of right now, it's really challenging to actually clone and bring back species that have gone extinct in the past, right? Because, like I said, for our current cloning technologies, you need a complete nucleus. You need a complete collection of all of their DNA. And these species that went extinct thousands of years ago, we just have little snippets of their DNA and we have to fill in the gaps. But I think moving further down that line is definitely going to be something that people are going to be interested in. As far as human applications, I don't know. It's really hard to say. I hope not. I don't think that's really an ethical thing to do as far as whole organism cloning. But what I do think is probably going to happen. Well, I mean, it's already, I guess, on the edge, is more molecular cloning for human use. And what I mean by that is cloning individual genes and putting those in people, right? So like a gene therapy kind of thing. So
Yeah.
say, you have cystic fibrosis or sickle cell anemia or something that's caused by a single gene, you can edit some of your cells with somebody else's version of a gene and then, cure or treat a disease that way. And so that's more of like a molecular level cloning. But yeah, as far as whole human cloning, I don't know of anybody actively pursuing it, and I think they would be met with some pretty strong ethical resistance, as I think they should be.
Yeah.
But the molecular cloning, I think, is definitely a hot topic. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely got some endangered species that I would like to see saved and some that are extinct about that, like the dodo bird. That'd be cool to
Hmm.
kind of see that. I remember when stem cell was getting pushed back. That seemed like many blue moons ago. But now here we are, stem cell is like a regular usage in medical
Oh yeah.
treatment. So that gene editing, I think that's going to be huge, in the future. And I don't think it's going to be as pushed back as stem cell because we already, use stem cell, like it's candy now. So it's an incredible frontier, man, and frankly, a little terrifying at the same time.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, because it's never, especially, talking about the species, I think it's super cool too to try to bring back some of these extinct species. The worry comes from, what's the point? Are we bringing it back to see them? Are we bringing them back to reintroduce into the wild? What kind of implications is that going to have
Yeah.
on natural ecosystems and things like that? So it's something to be met with trepidation. I think we need to, really think through exactly why we're doing this and do we really want to do it? Because in science, there's lots of cool things we can do. Not always should they be done though. But yeah. Who knows where we're going?
So has there been any like murmurs in your community where, people are kind of worried about these exotic animal collectors coming up to one of you guys and say, "Hey, here's $1 billion, make me a dinosaur."
Yeah, I mean, I haven't personally had anybody come up to me, but we're getting to, with the direwolf thing, right? That's kind of
Yeah.
reinvigorating a lot of those thoughts, right? Well,
Mhm.
what if we bring back this? What if I want to have a pet, saber-toothed tiger or something, right? And the reason the direwolves, I think, were so successful is because they were able to find, so with the direwolves, they found, I think it was like 14 genes or so
Yeah.
that were different in the direwolves. And so they kind of used a wolf template and then modified a few of those genes to make it, look like a direwolf. So I think the biggest holdback for things like dinosaurs would be, can we find enough high quality DNA from these archaeological digs or whatever to do something like that? But yeah, I mean, at some point in the future, you can imagine if this technology continues to improve and, as all technologies get cheaper and cheaper, there could be some wealthy people trying to get exotic extinct species. I could for sure see
Yeah.
somebody bringing that up and finding someone to do it. There's going to be someone out there to do it for the right price, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah, again, incredible frontier, a little terrifying at the same time, but that's exactly why we need these conversations like this, grounded in actual science rather than just fear. And I'm glad that you brought your expertise today and helping us unpack what's really going on behind the headlines. And frankly, I learned a lot, man. I really appreciate it a lot.
Well, thanks. It was good to talk to you about some cloning and stuff, Marcus.
Excellent. So if people want to get in touch with you or just learn more about the work you do, how can they do that?
Yeah, so my lab has an Instagram. You can follow us at Greulich_lab. That's a good place to follow us. We also have a website, Greulich Lab at mystrikingly.com. You can learn more about the lab there, or you can go to the Mercer University Bio Department website. You can just Google that, and I'm there. That's the university I work at, and you can click on my profile and read about my research there.
Excellent. So, audience, as you all know, we always have our resource section in the landing pages of all of our podcast episodes, and you will see all that information about Ben and his lab right there so that you can dig in. If it's one more takeaway that you wanted to give the people, who have anxiety about all of this, whether that be excitement anxiety or just fear anxiety, what type of advice would you give them?
Yeah, so I guess if you're excited about it, I think that's great. I love seeing people excited about science. You just can't get caught up in the excitement too much, right? You always have to think about when it comes to science, especially things that are human oriented, what's the reason we're doing this, right? Are we doing this for the right reason? Is there a way that this is going to hurt people, right? Are there going to be, unexpected outcomes from something like this? Because it's almost inevitable in biology when we start working with big things like cloning or ecosystems. If we try to make a big change, there's going to be unintended consequences. So we need to, be excited. It is cool stuff. It can be really helpful stuff. But we also need to temper that a little bit with, are we doing this for the right thing? And for those who are kind of scared about the technologies, it's as we've talked about, I think it's in all fairness to be scared of some of this stuff, but some of the, I think, fear is from things that are blown out of proportion a little bit, right? So cloning a pet, I don't think is that big of a deal. People as a community, the scientific community is not going to be too upset about that. But if you worry about human cloning and things like that, there's a lot of steps that would have to be bypassed or checked off before anything like that would be allowed, or it would be met with really harsh condemnation. And we've seen that in real time, right? There's a scientist a few years back who CRISPR edited human embryos for the first time, and he didn't really go through the proper channels. He just kind of did it, and he got thrown in jail actually for several years and
Yeah.
lost his lab. And so there's really harsh punishments for scientists who just kind of go rogue and do what they're wanting to do. So I wouldn't be too fearful. I'd be hesitant, but I wouldn't be fearful.
And that rogueness is definitely what causes the division. Like,
Yeah.
man, it's very divisive in the sense. And I think that's why the government comes down so hard on it, because we don't want people rioting in the street.
Yeah, yeah, you can't have people just, experimenting willy-nilly on people who don't really know, they don't really have the informed consent of how is this gonna help me, or how might this hurt me, is this really necessary? We've got to be able to trust that the scientists and the doctors are, keeping people's best interests in at heart. So,
Excellent. Well, Ben, thank you so much for your time once again. And to my audience out there, you got some of the best right here on the Transform You Live show. Till next time, many blessings, peace, and lots of love. What a conversation, folks. It's easy to look at something like pet cloning and just be like, wow, that's cool, or wow, that's weird. But it's being laid out for us. It's so much deeper than that. It challenges how we define life, how we deal with loss, and the responsibilities we have when we wield this kind of technological power. Just because we can duplicate DNA doesn't mean we can duplicate a soul or a memory. The transformation here isn't just about the biology. It's about how we, as a society, decide to use these tools. I want to know what you think. Is pet cloning a miracle of science or a step too far in the wrong direction? Drop a comment for me below. Let's keep this conversation going. I'm Marcus Hart. Until next time, keep transforming your perspective. Blessings, peace, and lots of love.
Thank you. Thank you for listening, and I'll catch you on the next one.